All right, Nancy.
All good? All right. All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today and joining the Systems Innovation New York City Hub today with this great event. I'm Nancy Wang, and along with Jeff Mignon and this event as well, we co-lead the New York City Hub. And we are so excited to welcome back Drs. Laura and Derek Cabrera. They are renowned scientists in systems thinking internationally, as well as known for their very extensive work in education. And they serve as faculty at Cornell University and have also founded the Cabrera Research Lab. So in part one of our discussion back over the summer, we talked about the primary education system and how to incorporate systems thinking into the schools and with teachers. For our part two today, we wanted to explore how to help parents and families with systems thinking for kids. And so just some housekeeping notes before we launch into the discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're monitoring it. We'll try to get to everyone's questions as much as possible. We'll ask some during the course of the discussion, but we'll also leave about 10 minutes at the end to try and answer more of them. So let's get to the topic at hand. Thanks, Laura and Derek, for joining us again. So some people talk about how to develop systems thinking for kids or incorporate systems thinking into kids' education. But we'd like to perhaps start with a bit of a provocative question. Would you say that, in fact, kids are natural system thinkers and that their environments, whether it be at school or elsewhere, are teaching them reductionist thinking? I know it sounds a little bit like a leading question, but let's see what the answer is from your perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that that lots of people pose. I guess I would say systems thinking is kind of made of two big things. One is sort of the way that you're going about thinking, and we can talk about that in a second. But the other is that you're aware of your thinking. And that in cognitive science, that's called metacognition. So to answer your question, I think when humans, kids, when they're born, are kind of predisposed towards systemic thinking because they're predisposed towards nature and everything else that we've evolved inside of. And it is true that our systems, not just our school systems, but all of our systems reward sort of linear types of thinking and reductionist types of thinking alone. To that extent, the answer is yes. But the metacognition piece, I think most people don't do. Even children left to their own devices will not be as metacognitive as one needs to do systems thinking. So we have to train people to think about their thinking so that they can get better at doing it on purpose.
All right. And so with trying to train with metacognition, and we know that you have also developed a methodology called DSRP. We touched upon it briefly in part one of our talk. But could you explain a little bit more this methodology, elaborate more on this? Because what we would like to start here is to put everyone on the same page on this DSRP methodology as we talk about how families can leverage this in their interactions with kids.
We're happy to do that. I guess one thing, Nancy, I would say is, we prefer, or we don't actually think of DSRP as a method.
Okay.
In other words, DSRP, based on some of the research we've done, is really actually how your brain works. It's how you build mental models, how you build meaning of things. So in other words, you don't really get to choose whether or not you use DSRP to build your mental models. But as Derek was saying, what you get to choose is whether or not you or your students or your kids are aware of how they're thinking things through. And basically, DSRP is 4 simple things, named brilliantly for its acronym. So it's 4 things. One is making distinctions between and among ideas. The other is organizing ideas into part-whole groupings, explicating relationships between and among ideas, and taking multiple perspectives on things or ideas. And so when we talk about getting started, and when we always say it's simple, which it is in its nature simple, to really become aware of, to get started and become aware of these things, you can just sort of ask yourself just five simple questions that relate to these 4 ways that we think. The first one is, what am I choosing to see or not to see in the thing that I'm looking at, right? How are those things organized into part-whole groupings? How are they related? Are those relationships made up of parts? And what are they looked at from? From what or whose perspective are we seeing them from? And that's sort of DSRP in a nutshell, or in 5 questions. And did you want to add anything to that? That's a good question that I should ask you.
Yeah, I mean, those questions that Laura's getting at, it's taken us a lot of research to get to those. Those are kind of the 5 questions that, when we look at large sample research in terms of what people do versus what they need to do to get to be better systems thinkers, those 5 questions really kind of expand what they're already doing. And so if you ask those questions, you'll just get better results. That's what our research has shown us. So they seem like 5 very simple questions, but doing that over and over again can lead to really pretty profound results.
Well, and just to be clear, those 5 questions are equally profound, whether you're distinguishing between the colors in kindergarten, or the states of matter in 7th grade, or even the most complicated scientific systems, as a grown adult in a lab. So those questions are universal. It's just the sophistication of content that will change. Hopefully throughout your life.
And hopefully, right? And with those 5 questions, though, do you have to consistently ask all 5? Or if you ask 2 out of the 5, 3 out of the 5, you will still gain benefit from thinking in the DSRP approach?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to use all of the questions. Our research has shown that you can get tremendous benefit out of just one of the questions. Part whole, for example, you could just do part whole. We have a case study that we did many years ago with what were those, first graders or third graders, pre-K
and K,
where we just asked them to. We taught them through a song, a part whole song, like every part is a whole, and every whole has parts, and they sang the song. And
it was very cute.
It was very cute. And they went out to describe a fire truck, which they do every year. But this year they got this new treatment in just part whole. And the results of that case study were that the fire trucks that the students built out of cardboard and paper mache and all kinds of other things, the fire trucks that they drew and the terminology that they used all increased dramatically from that simple part whole song, which lasted like 2 minutes. So the kids literally saw more of the fire truck. They described the fire truck in more complexity, more detail, and the built fire trucks that they drew, built, or talked about were much more complex.
Yep.
And so that's just an example of just using the S of DSRP, part whole, and to get very specific about what they did. In the past, they would have said, well, a fire truck is made up of, and they always pick the same things every year: the wheels, the steering wheel, the front, the back, the ladder. Those are the things that kids tend to see. Well, this year they did the wheels, the steering wheel, the front, the back, the ladder. And then they said, well, the ladder is a part, but it's also a whole with parts. So that means that there are these cross things, and then the cross things is a part, but it's also a whole with parts. And there's this grippy tape, and they went and over, down, zooming into the system and zooming out of the system, and just saw more of the fire truck. So that's a great example. And of course, we've done empirical research with literally a 30-second primer on part whole, 30 seconds. And the results are remarkable in terms of the before and after, in terms of what the US population describes.
Well, we did that with all 4.
And we did that with all 4 and
With
saw the same
distinctions,
results. Yeah.
Systems relation, and with less than a minute treatment, people statistically significantly saw more things in this task that we assigned.
Yep.
We should share that research.
Yes, we can.
We'll
We're
share
happy
that.
to
I was just going to say, and even if you, I don't know if you have a video of what you've been doing with the kids in terms of the fire truck one, or and any of that content would be so helpful.
We do have a video of a water, the features of a water geography, geology.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Okay.
where people that are listening to us can find information about DSRP?
Well, on our website, we have a lot of information. A ton of it's free. All of our papers are available for free. We try to make as much possible free as is possible. We also have our books. Those are a good starting point for systems thinking made simple, and thinking at every desk is an education book.
Yeah. And there's infographics, there's posters for classrooms. Actually, Nancy, if it's helpful, we can send you the batch of things that are specific to sort of education in little kids, and you can post it on your network so people can access it.
There's also a
sounds great.
1-hour documentary on education, an hour-long documentary on our work in education that a documentary filmmaker made, that we can send you that as well.
Okay, that would be perfect. That would be great.
And so Nancy asked the question, should we use all the 5 questions, but is there an order, a specific order, or you can attack the problem by any angle you want?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, you can attack it from any angle you want. I will say, just as a caveat, to be very precise in the answer, for example, when we're working with graduate students, we work in the School of Public Affairs policy, we do want you to ask all 5 of those questions, because we want you to get a very in-depth understanding of a system before you start solving a problem or a policy issue. But with young kids and anybody, A, they don't go in order. B, you can start from any one, and you can go as deep or as shallow as you want, depending on the sophistication or the age of your learner or your kid in that example.
Yep.
Yes.
And so today, because we're talking about parents and families and how to infuse that systems thinking or share that within the, I don't want to say necessarily the home environment, but the environment that you're in with your kids. Jeff is going to share an activity that was done at home. And as you said, it sounds like a very simple activity, but would love you to give some feedback on it to see if this is along the lines of, and I have to say, it sounds like it's along the lines of the fire truck example you just described, but would love to have you take a look at it, listen to it, and see what your feedback is on it.
Sure.
So I tried to use the DSRP methodology. I've been trained by you, so forgive me if it's not good enough. But so what I do, so for the people listening, the parents listening, and so what I do, I take Post-it and I take an apple, and I cut the apple in 2, and I put the apple on the table, and I say, okay, so what are the parts of the apple that you see? And the kids, they can use computer because of obviously there's part they know and there's parts they don't know. Okay, and so they put each part on a Post-it. Then after that they present their parts. So when last time I did the exercise, it was 3 person. They put the Post-it on the wall, and what they realize often it's about the same parts. They see about the same parts. Where the exercise becomes very interesting is at the moment I'm asking them to make distinction, So, and the way I ask, I say, okay, so if you had to put in two categories those parts, what would be those categories? And the goal of this exercise is really to show the concept of mental model, to start. Show is not the word, but just to start to have a sense of what mental model is. And that it's very interesting. So last time I did it, one kid's the distinction that the one kids did was what I can eat and what I cannot eat.
Yeah, that's great.
The other one was what I know, the parts I know, and the parts I don't know. And the third one was what I see and what I don't see. So it was really interesting to have this discussion saying you all see the same, you all are looking at the same thing, but you don't think about it the same way. So is it something that makes sense for you and it's in line with the DSRP model?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It hits on all the important things for that age and that kind of lesson. So that's spot on.
It's great.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, again, it's a very simple exercise or activity that parents and families can do at home, because it is interesting to see how the kids' minds work and how they group things. And, I wouldn't have thought of, what I eat and what I don't eat. So that was interesting to me. So for the audience here today, can you provide us with another concrete example of how to use DSRP in simple activities with kids? And maybe I'll take out the simple, but an activity with kids that we could just do at home or on the road or in a road trip when we're bored out of our gourd, like on a shopping trip or something like that. Can you share an example?
Sure. Well, first, I just wanted to add one thing to the apple example. Mm-hmm. If you notice when you were listening, Jeff was very good about languaging, oh, this is the perspective that you're looking at the apple from, right? So it's important that not only that the content is sort of getting you through the patterns of thinking that we're making distinctions, relationships, but that the person who's actually leading that activity is bringing that into the language, is bringing that into the forefront for the learner or the kid to understand that they're making a relationship. Because then once they understand that, they're going to start to make relationships in other things. Like the next lesson, they'll be looking for relationships. So you don't want those things to be sort of locked into the content. You want them to be included and then pull it out for the kids. So other examples, I would think.
Yeah, I think that the one that I would probably carry around with me all the time, metaphorically, but we actually have somewhere around here, the actual glasses, is just imagine having a set of superhero, sunglasses, DSRP sunglasses, and imagine sort of just taking one of the patterns, we call them patterns, the 4 patterns, D, S, R, and P, and looking at whatever's around you in the mall, at home, whatever, from one of those patterns or some of those patterns. So you might say, like, what is that outfit? What are the parts of that outfit? What makes an apple an apple? Where does an apple stop being an apple? At what point does it become like something that isn't quite an apple anymore? And kids love that kind of stuff. Like, is a hot dog a sandwich, or is a hot dog, the reason that's an interesting question is because it's right on the boundary of like a sandwich. It's got all the kind of parts of a sandwich, but it's kind of weirdly not a sandwich, but it is a sandwich. And like, we could debate it all day long, right? Because it's right on the edge. It's not an obvious thing. It's right on the edge of sandwichdom. And so, and everything is like that. Every single thing in the universe is like that. Well, when we're debating at the highest level of complexity right now, the Omicron out of South Africa, what scientists are debating is, and trying to figure out, is how is Omicron not the same as and the same as these other ones? Mm-hmm. And how are its relationships different? Because those relationships are how it kind of attaches to things. And what its makeup is. It's made up of 38 different mutations. That's a sort of part whole structure. And looking at it from different perspectives, like, is it more contagious or less? So when we're teaching our kids these very simple things like Jeff just went through, what we have to understand is those things they'll still be using those things for the rest of their life, regardless of how complex the topic or the issue or the system gets.
Well, and so one of the things I was thinking, Nancy, to your question is, so for example, I'll just give you like a handful of really short descriptions. So for perspectives, you can, what I'm trying to hope that we're getting across is that these skills transfer across topic, they transfer year to year. So for example, in perspectives, you can imagine we had a second grade class who built a model of a pond ecology. And then they literally took the perspective of every living thing in that pond to understand the pond. And then the teacher challenged them to take a non-anthropomorphic perspective, meaning not eyeballs, not something that's living. So they said, from the perspective of sustainability, and explain what sustainability was. What do you think about when you think about the pond? Then you can also imagine like an art teacher has a piece of art like Van Gogh's Starry Night or something and says, okay, look at this picture from the perspective of color, lines, emotion, so that's a skill that you can see can transfer across those topics. And that's true for each of those, each of the patterns with distinctions, systems, relationships. I can give you a ton of examples, but I'll stop.
Yeah, we have like a poster. We have a poster that is a great little poster that kind of gives you the concept for a game that you can play, which is just relationships, which is like, what's the relationship between a zebra and a popsicle, right? And so you just choose two things in your environment and just be like, what's the relationship? Well, both zebra and popsicles have a lot of water content, or, they could both, I guess, hypothetically be eaten, or, whatever it is. And you start getting good at making relationships between things that maybe are not, obvious relationships.
That's a really good one because it's simple. It's like you just pull two things from wherever you're sitting and start to, I'll put in quotes, play. The activity with the kids. So, or even no matter how old you are, it's just a family activity. And so just to leverage what you said about terminology though, and like the facilitator sharing the terminology. So some parents and families might not know that terminology, right? But they would love to either know more about systems thinking, or they don't even know that they're doing systems thinking. See, my terminology, I think I need to brush up on. But how important do you think knowing that terminology as a person who's sort of quote unquote facilitating that activity is?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that I'll say to this. First of all, just remember, little kids know the word snuffleupagus. So they can learn the words distinction, systems, relation very easily. Second of all, there are a ton of synonymous words that kids already understand, like connections, differences, points of view. So you can use those synonyms. The point is to language the lesson so that you're getting the learner or the kid to understand how they're thinking about the content, not just about the content itself, right? So when I'm making a relationship between two periods in a historical, piece of history, it's good to know that I am making that relationship as well as knowing what is inside of those pieces of history, right? Just like the difference between the states of matter and the difference between a mathematical equation and an expression, like just getting people to understand that those things are universal across those things. So you can use any language that works. It's basically distinguishing things, relating things, grouping things, and looking at things in many different ways. I mean, would you answer that differently? I don't know.
No, I would say the same thing, but I would say that if you had asked me that question 20 years ago, I would have said, nah, it doesn't matter. But today, based on what we've seen over the years and the research we've done, I have come to realize that having a language to describe your thinking is absolutely critical to understanding your thinking. And what DSRP is it's 4 patterns, and each pattern has 2 elements, 2 words. And so that what that means is 4 patterns plus 2, 2, 2, and 2. So that's 12 words. And in 12 words, which you could memorize in 2 minutes, you have the vocabulary for all of cognition and thinking that you need. So if you can just remember those 12 words: distinction, systems, relationships, perspectives, identity, other, part, whole, action, reaction, and point and view, you can do so much with just those 12 words. It's not a lot of terminology, and it's not complicated terminology. But like I said, I probably would have answered that question very differently 20 years ago.
So if you'll humor me with one short story that builds off of that. We were working with a large school district in Virginia, 5th grade classroom, a math teacher. And she was working with a student who was struggling with some concept. And she said, well, think about it. Think about it. Tell me what you're thinking. Think about it. And he finally said, Mrs. Novak, I don't know what you mean when you ask me that. I don't know what you're looking for. And so it was a great moment of pause for her. And we had been working with her. And so she actually slowed down and she said, when I'm asking you to think about it, I'm asking you, what's the relationship between these two concepts? How are they connected or not connected, right? What's the boundary between this piece of an equation and that piece, so she actually gave them, like he's saying,
A language
for how to articulate what they were thinking, how they were thinking about something. And from that point on, he got it. He just snapped. So anytime she said, what is your thinking? He would literally in his brain be like, oh, here's the things I'm connecting. Here's the things I'm not connecting. Here's why they're not connected, right? Here's why they're grouped, not grouped. And so there's a facility with that really helps move kids along, because I think we're not clear about that in schools. We're not clear what we mean by that, but we do expect it in the way that we teach, but we're not very specific about what we mean.
And we teach them the terminology for, hundreds of other topics, but we don't teach them the terminology for the thing that drives all of their understanding for their entire life of any topic.
It reminds me too. Also, my son was talking about his ELA teacher, and she had told him, "Well, write this better," and he was like,
"What does that mean?
What do you mean, write this better?" So he was recalling that story to me, and I was trying to explain to him, what she meant without even knowing what she meant, because I could share with him, organize it in paragraphs, and what's the relationship between the paragraphs, and that type of thinking.
But maybe before we go, there's something I would like to get back to, because you mentioned it about the perspective and the concept of anthropomorphic or not anthropomorphic perspective, and so can you explain a bit more about that? Because people can clearly understand, okay, a human as a perspective, but can a table as a perspective? So can you dig a little bit more into that, please?
Yeah, that one's an interesting one. So most people don't have any problem understanding that. I mean, everyone takes a perspective all the time, first of all. We often are taking our perspective. Occasionally, we'll start to take other people's perspective because we're social animals. And that's an incredibly important area of research. That's all human perspectives. Now, if I asked you to take the perspective of that deer or that frog or that, they're kind of animated like we are. And so people have a little bit easier time taking those perspectives. But if I ask you to take the perspective of sustainability or an economic perspective or the perspective of a table, that starts to get a little more challenging even. And I don't want to go too far down this road, but it turns out that everything in the universe has a point of view. And so we can take perspectives of a table. An example of that would be if you take like acting, classic improv acting class. I say, act as if you're the carpet, and so you might flop on the floor and lay completely flat and completely still, and maybe make noises as people walk on you, or some kind of thing, right? So you're literally putting yourself in the carpet and sort of seeing what it would be like to be a carpet, and obviously you're kind of spinning some human-like qualities in there. But but we're very capable of doing that. And the brain and the mind is doing that all the time. And so we can actually take perspective from any object or from anything, any concept, anything, any object, any person, any animate character.
And I know it's a bit, the answer is a bit obvious, but I still want to hear the answer from you. What is the benefit for the kids to be able to think in perspective, to see that, you know, what is the cognitive benefit?
It's just beyond, it's beyond transformative. I mean, the ability to see from the perspective of everything in a complex network and see the network as if you're that thing. It means that your mind is fluid. It means that your mind is adaptive. It means that your mind is robust. And not only that, those are sort of the analytical side, or what we sometimes call the IQ side of things. Right. But then there's the EQ side of things, the emotional intelligence, the empathy, the ability to take the perspective of others, to have compassion, to have empathy, even things like design thinking where you're having empathy for your customers. So, you know, better business principles are based on fundamentally based on perspective taking. It is such a critical skill that without it, we just wouldn't be the humans that we are. But it's a skill that we don't develop in children in an explicit way, and we should be developing it because it's an absolutely, it is core to being human and to understanding the universe.
Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
There's so many questions. Well, we had mentioned parents, families, kids, you know, the facilitators knowing terminology or not knowing. One of the questions from our audience here is, have you ever applied these same techniques, simple games, etc., to teach adults about systems thinking? If so, was it successful? Because, you know, there isn't a hard line saying, oh, 18, you're a kid, and then 19, you're an adult. Although, you know, some people say that, but it's fluid, we evolve, and adults can be learning the same things about systems thinking through simple games. Have you done this before?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it all just games. I mean, there are things we do that I would say are more playful. Like we have somewhere made thousands of pairs of sunglasses that have, you know, like DSRP as a lens that we've used with adults in workshops. We also have tactile manipulatives actually that we've created that we use with large groups where they actually like make each thing in a distinct idea, and then they can relate them, take perspectives.
Software that does the same thing. Yeah.
You know, to some adults, just having a bunch of Post-its that are different colors and a whiteboard feels playful, right? So all of those things, the point is all of those things are meant to sort of orient these concepts with objects or with physical movement. And we find that, I mean, and that's true of all learners, that, you know, when you use gesture, when you use objects, moving just beyond language, that you're burning more neurons, you're learning more, you know, you're able to retain more when you do that. So I actually think that, you know, because of the necessity of that object orientation, they work very well. Yeah. And also the nice thing for us is that whether we're working with kindergartners or, you know, executives in some Fortune 500 company, we're able to teach these skills in their own content, in their own world, in things that are relevant to them. So because these skills transfer across domains, any of those things work well.
And I would just piggyback on that. I just so that it's really clear, because a lot of people don't see maybe the behind the scenes, but we teach preschoolers, kindergartners, third graders, eighth graders, 12th graders. We teach graduate students at Cornell. We teach doctoral students. We teach scientists. We teach business leaders, the top in the world, government leaders, you know, every kind of person. And we teach them the same 4 things. Yeah. The same 4 things. Now, the content they're dealing with is dramatically diverse and different. And obviously what a CEO or a scientist is dealing with is much more complex and you know, difficult maybe than say what a third grader is dealing with. But the 4 underlying patterns remain the same the whole time. We teach that CEO the exact same 4 patterns to solve the complex problems that they're trying to solve, as we teach a third grader who's trying to learn about, whatever it is. That bodes well, by the way, educationally, because it means that if we actually teach them when they're young, they will just be incredible, fluid, adaptive thinkers by the time they're older.
Is there a contradiction between this system thinking approach and reductionism? Because this is something in the community of system thinking that there's some like churches around that. so there's more and more churches. The more I dig in it, the more churches I'm finding, by the way. So
what, so many of them.
Yeah. So what is your thought around
that's such a great question, and it's a really, really important question. There's a lot of we can send you an article on the most popular tropes of systems thinking, which need to be undone, because there's quite a number of them. And the idea that systems thinking is anti-reductionist is the first thing that you should cancel from your list. That is not true. Systems thinking is holistic, but systems thinking is also reductionistic. What makes systems thinking different is that it's both. So systems thinking is not only holism, and systems thinking is not only reductionism. Systems thinking is both. That is what fundamentally differentiates systems thinking, is that it's both. But it's wrong, absolutely wrong, and absolutely incoherent to say that systems thinking is anti-reductionism, or that it's only holism, that it's only the forest and not the trees. You have to understand both to understand both.
And what I like about your approach is it doesn't seem that we need specific material. So going back to the school, going back to the kids, that we need specific material to do that. We don't have to make the revolution in what the kids are doing. It's just another angle to look at what they are doing. Do you confirm that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we spent 10, 12 years in, K-12 schools. And the thing that I think was so well received was that you can embed this type of thinking, this type of language into any existing content, any of the Common Core standards in science, math, in anything. It's just literally embedding this as a lens into understanding how you're thinking about that content. And it worked very well.
What DSRP theory explains is that there are these 4 simple rules that are organizing information. So it really, DSRP is agnostic. It doesn't care what the information is.
Yeah.
It can organize any information. And that's why you can talk to a third grader about the information that they're dealing with, and you can talk to a CEO about the information they're dealing with, and a COVID scientist about the information they're dealing with. And even though that information is very different, they all are organizing it in these same patterned ways.
Yeah.
And how would you recommend a parent that, for example, is listening to this conversation or watching the video to bring this concept of system thinking into the classroom? Is it something that you have been helping with? So I'm a group of parents, and I think it's important that the kids are exposed to that. How do I talk to the school about it?
Yeah, I mean,
good luck. It's the third rail of education.
Well,
right?
no, but I mean, parents have a lot of influence, and they are, the homeschool connection is important. And even if, for example, a school is not explicitly teaching these things, a parent can actually teach them and reinforce them inside of the content that kids are learning in school. So the first thing I would say, Jeff, that I think is important is for people to understand why systems thinking is important for kids to learn, for anyone to learn. But in this case, I mean, if you think about, we talk about this all the time. You think about the amount of information that is coming at your kids every day, whether it's through school, social media, whatever it is, they're inundated with information, right? And that's true of everything. Like we talk about this VUCA world, that it's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. That's the world they're growing into. That's the world they're going to become professionals in, where having some facility and some understanding with how to take in all of that information, how to organize it in a way that's meaningful and that's, that's useful and meaningful is an incredibly important skill. Meaning the environment that our kids are growing up in is so fast and so full of information that really this is the only way that they're going to be able to move through it quickly, move through it with efficiency, and have those I think of it like I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think about it like a backpack, right? If I walk through school, kindergarten through 12th grade, and I have the backpack of systems thinking and understanding how I'm thinking about things, every single year, every single topic, I'm going to understand it more deeply. I'm going to retain more. I'm going to do better on the tests. I'm going to do better in my connections with humans. I'm going to do better, which means I'm going to graduate from school with a set of skills. No matter what kind of job I go into, what field I go into, I can bring that to it, right? We talk to executives all the time. The reason that a lot of corporations have sort of their own internal universities is they get college graduates who come out into the world and they can't think. They can't think things through. They're great with content. They've mastered all the content, but they can't think things through. Did you want to?
And our schools are really, we have to face the fact that our schools are very information centric.
Yes.
Even though information is a dime a dozen, and we're not thinking centric, which is fundamentally what makes us valuable, is the thinking that we do, the meaning that we bring to information. DSRP helps us to organize information so that it's meaningful. Information in and of itself is not meaningful until we organize it. And DSRP is telling you how your brain organizes information. So I mean, to get back to your question, Jeff, I think you've got to somehow convince them that the information focus has to change. The curricular focus on information has to change. That we have to teach kids how to think, not what to think, because there's such an infinitude of what to think. There's so much of it. And who knows what they're going to need to know. They could end up being like a World War II reenactment clothing designer, that's a real job, that's a cool job. And what are they going to need to know to do that? The capital of Texas? No, they're not going to need to know that.
Depends.
So the information is going to vary, but the underlying patterns remain constant.
Well, and let me give you a really concrete example of something that parents could do, just as an example. So when our children were small, they would come home, small, like first grade or maybe kindergarten. They would have this homework that was basically a list. And there was like a baseball, a soccer ball, a football, and then there was a baseball bat, a net, and this and that. And the homework was to simply draw a line from the ones that connect. I'm sort of simplifying it. Well, what if after they drew those lines, you ask them a simple question, which, how are these things related? Just have them talk about the relationship in a more robust way than just saying that they are related. Ask them how they're related. That's teaching a kid how to go deeper into the kinds of content that they're bringing home. You can imagine that in any homework they would bring, that if you just sort of ask them slightly deeper questions, even if they're not being asked those questions at school, you're developing that skill. You're developing that skill at home, which is
and partially, what they do is they just mark the relationships that are just the norm.
Yeah.
So they're just regurgitating back the norm.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that I, ended up failing out of high school and not doing very well all throughout my life in school was because I would have drawn relationships between everything, and that's not the right answer, but it is the answer that's actually real.
And it's smart.
Yes.
So, my problem was always on the test. I could justify any answer because if you think about it in some varied way, you can make any answer kind of work.
Right.
So then I was like, I don't know, but I could kind of go through and it could be A through Z,
Yeah, like why aren't all of the balls related on one side and all the other things related differently on the other
exactly.
side? Like, those are relationships, but they want you to go from the baseball to the
Right.
baseball bat. Well, why?
Why?
Right.
Why-
That sounds like my daughter, actually. She could talk through anything and have a relationship between any two objects, and it would make sense.
Exactly.
One basic question that I would like to ask, and sorry if I'm asking, but I want to make sure that people grasp that. So how DSRP is related with critical thinking?
Ah.
Jeff, you're really hitting all the big ones. So yeah, do you want me to take that one, or you want to
You
take
can start.
Yeah.
I'll pipe in.
So critical thinking, to me, I have a little bit of a pet peeve around critical thinking. I think critical thinking is like saying that you're going to learn critical thinking is like saying that you're going to adopt a bias. And I don't think we should be teaching kids bias. Critical thinking is, I don't know why we would do it. Systems thinking is understanding the system that you're trying to understand. That's it. You're trying to understand it in all of the ways that it is. And you're not being critical of it. You're not being negative. You're not being positive. You're not being like, figure out how it could. You're just trying to understand it. Right. And so, we've done critical thinking a great disservice. We see it in our doctoral students. We teach them to be so critical that oftentimes when an idea is just poking through the soil, it's like a little bud, little green, tiny bud poking through. They're critically analyzing it. And you're like, you got to give that idea some time to grow before you start pruning it, Otherwise, it's going to die.
Yeah.
And so critical thinking really, I don't see I know this is absolutely heretical,
We're going to hear
but
about
I don't
this
see
later.
a purpose for it. I think it's an absolutely horrible thing to do to people, to teach them critical thinking. And I think we should stop it. It's also almost entirely based on bivalent Aristotelian logic, which is either or logic, rather than multivalent logic, which systems thinking is based on. So generally speaking, I'm pretty, it's like something we should probably retire.
I'm pretty sure he was stepping in.
The other piece that I would say is there's a mentality in education, which is like, oh, well, we have to teach thinking. Okay, we agree with you. We have to teach thinking. So what they do is they say, we're going to put a critical thinking course in sophomore year in high school. And that's when they'll learn to think. And you're like, wait a minute, what? Like thinking is the process of organizing information for meaning.
Yeah.
Thinking has to happen all the way through. It's not, you don't do one course sophomore year in critical thinking. It's happening all the way through. As you're learning information, you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate, just make clear for people what is multivalent thinking versus bivalent thinking?
Bivalent thinking is either or thinking. Jim Collins sometimes calls it the tyranny of either or versus the genius of and both. And systems thinking really is an and both multivalent mindset. So bivalent means bi, two. It means like ones and zeros, or black and white, or yes or no, or guilty or not guilty. There's only two possibilities. But if you think about it, just as put your mind in a business paradigm. If I say to you, do customers want a faster product or a cheaper product? Which one do they want? That's bivalent thinking. But in reality, we all know they want a faster, cheaper product. In fact, they want it to be really fast and practically free, right? So
And looks good.
It has to look good too, right? So that's a multivalent universe that we live in. It's a universe where there are an infinite number of shades of gray between 0 and 1, which there is actually in mathematics, an infinite number of shades of gray. So it's not binary. It's not bivalent, it's multivalent. Systems thinking is multivalent.
Yeah.
So going back to what we just mentioned about the VUCA world, there's a question here. Would you say that the big change coming about is that we need to start to teach students metacognition capacity to thrive in this new information and creative economy? And is systems thinking that metacognition framework?
Bingo.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, if everything that we're learning now is, especially for kids who are in school now, is going to be completely different by the time they're out there in the world, the only thing that they're going to have of any value is their ability to think fluidly, adaptively, quickly, and organize information with great facility to bring about meaning. I mean, that's the skill that they're going to need. I mean, sure, they could know the capital of Texas, and sure, they could know
That wouldn't hurt.
all kinds of things. It may not hurt depending on what they end up in. But, you know, things are not going to be the same as they are now when they're out in the world. So you have to have that transferable skill.
And if you think about Kahneman's work, he just won the Nobel Prize in behavioral economics of system 1, system 2. System 1 is kind of fast, but error prone that we use a lot. And system 2 is kind of slow, but more accurate. We're never, the way to get system 1, which is fast, to also be more accurate, or alternatively to get system 2, which is slow, but accurate, to be faster, either one, they're kind of the same thing in a sense, is metacognition. So the person who wrote that is absolutely right on.
Yep.
When we show people how their mind works and they pause long enough to see how it's working, that is the greatest thing that we have against the error of system 1 thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
Going back to, because this approach and knowing the 12 key words, do you have those 12 keywords on your site? Because I think that's powerful, right? So anytime you memorize these 12 keywords, you can use it in your vocabulary throughout. Is there a way to infuse this better through the classes or at home, or how do we do that?
I mean, I think it's what we were talking about. I think it's about developing a language that's comfortable to talk about how you're thinking things through. I mean, you know, we have a 14-year-old son. He gets in the car. What'd you do in school today? Nothing. Well, they're doing homework. Oh, I just have to finish this. You know, these are the instructions. Well, let's slow down a minute. Let's think about what you're really doing and why we're doing it, and talk about how you're coming to understand the solution to that problem. It's just literally changing the conversation a little bit. Even if you vary the 12 words, but they're the same in meaning, it's getting kids to be aware that they're building understanding through these 4 processes. And it's just doing it over and over in whatever grade, whatever topic. I mean, we've done it for years with all kinds of homework assignments, and, you know, we do it with our college students. And I mean, it's just a way of thinking and talking about it, right?
Yeah, and I go back to what Laura said at the very beginning, which is you don't, a lot of people say, well, you know, this sounds cool, maybe I'll use it. You don't get to choose whether you use it. You're using it already. You're already making distinctions. You're making distinctions right now. Visual distinctions, auditory distinctions, taste distinctions. You're doing that all the time. You're taking perspective right now. You're grouping things right now. You're grouping me and you're grouping Laura and making a distinction as a result of the groupings, visually and in every other way. So you're doing this no matter what. Being aware that you're doing it is what you get to choose. You don't get to choose whether you use it. You get to choose whether you know that you're using it.
Yes.
And the words are just, they're just words that help us describe it to ourselves and to others. And they're easy words. Like I said, they're part, whole, action, reaction, point and view, identity, other.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the other thing is we learned this very quickly when we were working with teachers in districts across the country. You got to get the adults to see it first. So like if I'm the parent of a kid, I need to start looking around in my own daily life. What are the distinctions I'm making when I'm solving this problem at work? What are the relationships I'm making when I'm cooking this dinner for, you know, this meal for dinner? Like see it every day in my own life. Then I can help other people see it and help language it with my kids.
Like we have a sandwich night that we do where we focus like incredibly tiny focus on the way that the sandwich is made. What goes first, what gets layered, why do you put the salt on at a particular moment, because it filters down into the alfalfa sprouts. It interacts with the alfalfa sprouts in such a way that the alfalfa sprouts hold it in there. Whereas if you put it on another layer, they would slide off. So the relation, just simple things around the house you can do DSRP with it. You can do it with a sandwich. You can do it with cooking. You can do it with putting the groceries away, all kinds of things.
Right. Groceries. Like when our son was 4.
Yeah, that's right.
He made the distinction, fridge, not fridge.
Fridge, not fridge.
He
That
put
was
stuff
his
for
big
the
one.
fridge on this side, stuff for the not, and he would say not fridge. This is not for the fridge. Put it over there.
So once we did that, because at first he didn't know what to do and he got kind of frustrated. And then he's like, so there's fridge and there's not fridge. And we're like, yes, do that. Like just take stuff out and separate them like fridge, not fridge.
Well, thank you also for the dinner suggestion for tonight.
Yes, exactly.
We'll make sandwiches and have a robust conversation on that. Our kids will be like, oh, are you using us as guinea pigs again?
I have a question on tools.
Yes.
So because some people that would like maybe to use some online tools to do this DSRP exercise. Is there any tools that exist to do that? What do you recommend?
There's a couple of things. One of the things, because we're talking about kids, is really questions, changing the kinds of questions. There's a tool we have called Thinkry, and you can put that link in the chat, I think. It's thinkry.us, and it's basically, it lists those 4 or 5 simple questions I started with, but then there's almost a Mad Libs where you fill in a word. There's a place where you can actually literally put in the things that your kids are thinking about, put it in the blank and hit a button, and it'll give you the sort of DSRP systems thinking questions you could ask. Derek put the link in there. That's for kids, that's one of the best tools. The other tool that I'm sure Derek will riff on in a second is use stuff, right? Represent things that seem abstract to kids with stuff, with buttons or coins or
sugar packets
or blocks, whatever you have, and say, okay, this is the Revolutionary War and this is the Vietnam War, and how are they different? How are they, concretize things. Those are you want to riff on those a little bit?
Well, we just have there's more neurons connecting this brain of ours to your hands, your eyes, and your tongue than the rest of your entire body. So if you can make things visual and make things tactile, object oriented, the more you do that, the better, the more you're speaking into more neurons, essentially.
Yeah.
And so the brain likes that. All the brains like that, all of our human brains. The other tools would be, Plectica software, which we developed for DSRP. There's Think Blocks are a great tool. We use them with kids and scientists and executives.
They're dry erasables. Yeah.
Just mapping in general. What?
Lego's
a great tool. Learning the little diagramming method that you can do on a napkin or on a whiteboard, that's also done in software, but it's a very simple diagramming method, as simple as the 4 questions. Those are kind of the main tools. There's also a tool called the Systems Thinking and Metacognition Inventory. It's the first valid assessment of systems thinking that exists today. And that is that kind of gives you a personalized report on where you're at skills wise and efficacy wise and things like that, so that you know what to develop versus where you're strong, where you're weak, that kind of thing.
And where we can find this tool?
Everything is on our website, cabreraresearch.org, and we're happy to after this, we can send you an email or something that you can share.
There's also
has some links.
There's a little chat thing on our website that you will get an answer fairly quickly if you go and ask.
Yeah, in the bottom right-hand corner of our website, there's a chat function. You can always ask us a question, and we usually can send you something or give you some insight into what you're interested in.
Yeah, and I put links to the website for the audience of your website. I put several links in the chat. But one last word, maybe, Nancy, because I see that
we're very unfortunately coming to the top of the hour.
Yeah, you also provide trainings that can be found on your website, correct?
Yes, we do.
We have online trainings, which are skills courses. We also do custom live online trainings for groups. So
there's everything from, you know, a 30-minute training or 12-minute training that's free on our homepage to a 30-minute trainings on LinkedIn to 5, 6, 7-hour online trainings to whole year-long training. So, you know, that we do at Cornell and things like that. So
I also, if you want, you can always just email me. I will email you back. If you have a question specific to your world, I'm always happy to connect you with the right things.
Well, perfect. Well, I think
our vision is 7 billion systems thinkers. So you guys are part of it.
Each one of us count as 1,000 people.
If you're an influencer, yeah, you get other people to learn.
Excellent.
We have to. I mean, I say that jokingly, but if there ever was a time in our lives, we've all been around for a while, you know, that proves how much we need systems thinking. Boy, this is it. I mean, now is the time.
For sure.
So.
Well, I think we're on the cusp of a huge trend, and I don't want to say trend too lately, but I think spreading this, we're all doing our part. We're trying to contribute and add value wherever we can, whether it be home, school, workplace.
Exactly.
But I just want to give a big thank you to both of you, Derek and Laura, for today's part 2 of the series. We may invite you back in the spring because I could talk about this all day, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we could discuss. But thank you again from the Systems Innovation New York City Hub. And
yes, thank you for doing what you guys do.
And thank all of you for taking the time. We appreciate it. We're always happy to talk to people.
Thank you so much.
Right. All right. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks,
see you, everyone.